According to the World Bank, in the last 10 years, the global GDP has grown by almost 36%. However, there are some European nations that have performed much worse. Today, we will look at the countries in Europe whose GDP has grown too slowly over the last 10 years, and in some cases, it is even in decline. However, it's important to clarify that the countries on this list are not necessarily poor. In fact, some nations we will see are very wealthy, but they have struggled to grow over the last decade. Other countries on this list already had weaker economies before, but now they are worsening every year. Since GDP is not the only indicator of a country's wealth and well-being, feel free to share your thoughts on this situation in the comments. Welcome to this new video from Amazing Europe. Number 10. Denmark. We start with a powerful economy, but one that has not shone as brightly as others in the last 10 years. Between 2013 and 2023, Denmark's GDP grew by 17.6%. At first glance, this might seem like a good result, but compared to the 129% of another European country, the difference is striking. If you want to know which country this is, subscribe to the channel, we'll talk about it soon. Danish GDP has experienced many ups and downs in recent years. Now the Danes are focusing on key sectors to revive growth. The pharmaceutical sector is one of them. Novo Nordisk, a pharmaceutical giant, saw its value rise to $435 billion, even surpassing the country's GDP in 2023, which was $404 billion. This was mainly thanks to the success of its obesity drug. The gas industry is also making progress. With the reopening of fields in March 2024 and the energy crisis in Europe, Denmark hopes to play a crucial role. These factors have also led to record employment levels, with 68.4% of workers in 2023. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. While the employment rate is rising, so is the number of unemployed. This apparent contradiction is possible because the number of inactive people, those who are not working but are also not officially registered as unemployed, is decreasing. To complicate matters, high interest rates are hitting the construction sector hard. The big question is, will drugs and gas definitively save the Danish economy? Number 9. Spain. Spain's GDP performance over the last decade has certainly not been among the best, but in the last couple of years, things have been improving. Around the 1990s, some journalists coined a term to define certain European countries with weak economies. They called them pigs, an obviously offensive term. Spain was one of these countries. They had a disastrous public debt to GDP ratio, and productivity was not great, at least compared to other European countries. Just when it seemed like the situation was improving for some of them, the 2008 economic crisis hit, making things even worse. The peak for Spain came in 2014 when unemployment reached 21.4%. But since 2015, the Spanish have begun to see the light at the end of the tunnel. GDP started to grow, by 3.5% in just 1 year. Then came the pandemic, which was not a panacea for any European country. However, Spain has managed to recover since then. In fact, Spanish growth since 2020 has been better than Denmark's. Now the Spaniards are far from the negative records of a few years ago. Unemployment is at 11.6% of the population. That's still a lot, but much less than the 21.4% of just 10 years ago. However, Spain already started with a weak economy, which has meant that GDP grew, but only slightly. From 2013 to 2023, it grew by only 16.6%. Number 8. Finland. The iPhone killed Nokia, and the iPad destroyed the paper industry, but we will rise again. These words don't come from just anyone, but from the former Prime Minister and current President of Finland, Alexander Stubb. We had two pillars to rely on, the IT sector and the paper industry. Steve Jobs took our jobs. And he's not wrong. For years, the Finnish economy relied on Nokia and the massive paper production, favored by its endless forests. But when Silicon Valley arrived, Finland couldn't keep up, and its economy collapsed. Naturally, experts were divided. Some blamed wages and welfare, while others pointed to the euro. Among them, none other than Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman, who said the euro didn't directly cause the crisis but prevented the Finns from reacting. According to him, if they had their own currency, they could have devalued it, making Finnish products more competitive abroad. But with the euro, the only option left was to cut wages. We'd love to know what you think about this. In any case, the Finnish economy is slowly recovering, at least according to the Bank of Finland. Even though there have been ups and downs in recent years, the institute predicts a GDP increase of 1.7% by 2026. From 2013 to 2023, GDP grew by 10.6%. Number 7, France. In France, there is a huge gap between Paris and the rest of the country, especially in terms of purchasing power. While in the Paris area, purchasing power is 63% higher than the European Union average, in other French regions, it is below this threshold, except in Provence and the French Riviera. Over the past few years, things haven't been going well in France from this perspective. Although purchasing power has increased slightly in the last decade, it has done so at a much slower pace than in other European countries, even slower than the one we'll discuss shortly. If we focus on the period from 2019 to 2022, during the pandemic, the data is quite disastrous, especially when compared to other European nations. Except for a couple of regions, purchasing power has decreased everywhere else, and in the Paris region, it has even dropped by 18%. The European Union has taken notice and warned Paris that French administrations overspent by €16 billion in 2024 alone. It also pointed out that French revenues were lower than expected, and there were unforeseen expenses, including early elections and interventions in New Caledonia, where gendarmes were sent to quell the riots this year. From 2013 to 2023, the French GDP grew by only 7.8%. Number 6, Italy. Italy has grown less than France since 2013, but if we only consider the years following the pandemic, Italians have performed better. To be clear, Italy's GDP has always been lower than that of France, and it still is. Since 1993, the gap between these two countries has widened in favor of France, partly due to a terrible speculative event that hit Italy and the United Kingdom. A little curiosity, do you know who was behind the collapse of the Italian economy in 1992? None other than George Soros. Don't worry, this is not a conspiracy theory, he said it himself. Through a speculative attack on the pound and the lira, he managed to earn more than $1 billion in just a few days. But this led to a 30% devaluation of the Italian lira and its exit from the European monetary system. Soros never regretted his speculative action and years later stated, "Speculators do their job, they are not to blame. It's the lawmakers who are responsible for allowing such speculation. Speculators are merely the messengers of bad news." However, now the Italian economy is growing, and in recent years, it has even been growing faster than France and Germany. Agriculture, fishing, industry, and services are all improving in Italy, but the wounds of the past remain. From 2013 to 2023, Italy's GDP grew by only 5.3%. Number 5, Sweden. Sweden's GDP performance has been rather poor over the past 10 years. To be clear, we are still talking about a strong economy. Yet, it seems that Sweden is relying more on past glories than on current great performances. Between 2013 and 2023, its GDP only increased by 1.1%. And the outlook for the future is not promising either. Several experts say there are many similarities between the housing crisis Sweden is currently facing and the economic crisis the country experienced in the 1990s. House prices and mortgage interest rates have returned to the same levels as 30 years ago. Back then, the crisis led to the nationalization of 2 banks, the bailout of a third, and a devaluation of the Swedish krona, plunging Sweden into a severe recession. Today, several Swedish economists warn that history could repeat itself. To make matters worse, Sweden is also seeing a decline in stock levels and household consumption. Simply put, companies are producing less, and families are buying less. In fact, per capita GDP has decreased by almost 8% over the past 10 years. Meanwhile, house prices have doubled from 2007 to 2022. In short, Sweden remains a strong economy, but there are many questions about its future. Number 4, Greece. Over the past 10 years, all the nations we will mention from now on have seen a reduction in their GDP. One of these is Greece, which, like Spain, was part of the so-called pigs, a derogatory term for Europe's weakest economies. Some countries have overcome the crisis, but for others, like Greece, the road is still long. Who doesn't remember the 2009 crisis? The Greek economy collapsed, losing a quarter of its GDP. Household purchasing power dropped by almost a third, and unemployment reached nearly 30%. Today, however, Greece is recovering. While GDP fell by 0.3% between 2013 and 2023, it has increased by 26% since the start of the pandemic. Unemployment has also been cut in half. But not everything is resolved. Take tourism, for example. 1/5 of the country's GDP, a quarter of employment, and almost half of all exports are linked to tourism. But we all know that tourism is very unstable. If it declines, the Greek economy risks collapsing again. Another challenge is the wage freeze, with salaries growing less than inflation. According to experts, Greece's economic difficulties, despite some improvements, stem from austerity policies imposed by the Troika. These policies are said to have slowed the country's modernization by focusing too much on reducing consumption and too little on strengthening production capacity. What do you think about the Troika's intervention? Number 3. Belarus. Since 2020, the European Union has progressively introduced sanctions against Belarus, but surprisingly, this does not seem to have affected its GDP. In fact, between 2020 and 2023, the Belarusian economy grew by 17%. However, the good news stops there. Despite this recent growth, the country's GDP is far from the levels of over 10 years ago. From 2013 to 2023, it saw an overall decline of 4.8%. The real collapse occurred in 2015, a dark year for Belarus, when its GDP plunged by 28%. And it wasn't alone. That year, all European nations, except one, suffered economically. The reasons for this downturn are varied. The Chinese economic crisis slowed global growth, hurting economies most tied to Chinese exports. Additionally, the collapse in oil prices hit not only oil-producing countries but also those like Belarus, which depend on raw materials. The Belarusian petrochemical sector, still crucial today, was greatly affected. Lastly, the economic sanctions imposed on Russia after the annexation of Crimea also had repercussions on nearby countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, which had close trade ties with Moscow. Only one European country saw GDP growth that year. If you want to know which one, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the video we'll release on the 10 fastest growing European economies. Number 2. Ukraine. It's no surprise to find Ukraine on this list. Looking at GDP trends over the last 10 years, it's clear that the two major declines coincide with events related to Russia. The first crash, in 2014, followed Russia's annexation of Crimea after a referendum not recognized internationally. The first sanctions against Moscow, though aimed at Russia, also severely impacted Ukraine, whose GDP fell by 52% between 2013 and 2015. Since then, the Ukrainian economy started to recover, even registering growth during the pandemic while other nations were in decline. But with the outbreak of war, the GDP took another hit. Today, it is regaining strength, thanks largely to international aid. However, the situation remains complex. A third of Ukrainian businesses have disappeared, and 10% of housing is uninhabitable. Energy production, constantly targeted by Russian attacks, is down to 20% of pre-war levels. To make matters worse, inflation reached 20% in 2022. Although the situation is more stable now, severe infrastructural challenges persist. Over 8,400 kilometers of roads, 50 kilometers of railways, and nearly 400 bridges have been destroyed. This drastically slows transportation, with heavy consequences on the country's economy. From 2013 to 2023, Ukraine's GDP experienced a loss of 6.2%. Before revealing the unexpected country at number 1, if you found this video informative, we kindly ask you to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you don't miss our new videos. This simple gesture would greatly help us spread our project and improve the quality of our information. Thank you so much. Number 1. Norway. Over the past 10 years, Norway's GDP has experienced ups and downs. From 2013 to 2023, it saw a decrease of 7.7%, making Norway the European country with the worst economic performance, excluding transcontinental nations. However, the situation is more complex than it seems. In 2015, Norway was also hit by the global crisis, losing 26% of its GDP in just 2 years. The recovery was slow and never fully returned to pre-crisis levels. Then came the pandemic, and Norway felt its impact as well. But one event changed the game: the war in Ukraine. The European Union, seeking to reduce its dependence on Russian raw materials, began strengthening trade relations with other countries, including Norway. The result was that Norwegian oil exports to the European Union grew by 18% in just 1 year. In 2023, 30% of the gas consumed in Europe came from Norway. Along with Norway, the United States was the other country that benefited most from the sanctions against Russia, increasing its gas exports to the European Union. As for oil, the big winners were Norway, the United States, and Saudi Arabia. While Russian oil imports dropped by 22%, Saudi oil imports rose by 47%. Thanks to these developments, Norway's GDP grew by 32% from 2020 to 2023, but the golden days still seem far away. We made a video showing the European countries where it is hardest to make ends meet. We recommend watching it for a more complete view of the situation. You can find it in the top right. That's all for this video. See you next time.